The air in the quiet room hummed with an unspoken tension. It was the kind of tension that settled into the bones, a low thrum of anxiety that never quite faded. Outside, the world spun on, indifferent to the silent battles waged within so many hearts. We yearn for stillness, for a moment where the ground beneath our feet feels solid, dependable. Yet life itself is a river, always moving, always changing, and in that movement, we often find ourselves fighting the current, desperately trying to hold onto something that by its very nature cannot be held. This clinging, this fierce desire for things to remain as they are, is the silent undertow of our suffering. It's the tightening in the chest when a loved one moves away, the sting of disappointment when a plan goes awry, the hollow ache when a cherished possession is lost or broken. We tell ourselves we are simply valuing what we have, that this holding on is a sign of love, of care. But the Buddha saw it more plainly. He saw attachment not as a gentle embrace, but as a cage meticulously built from our own desires, our own fears. Imagine a man standing at the edge of a vast chasm. His life depends on staying put, but a gust of wind pushes him, and in a panic, he grabs a rope dangling into the abyss. He clings to it with all his might. His knuckles turn white, his muscles scream with the effort, but he cannot loosen his grip. He is in agony, suspended between the solid ground he left behind and the terrifying emptiness below. The rope is taut, pulling him down, tearing at his hands. This is the paradox the Buddha unveiled. The very thing we grasp for security, for a sense of permanence, becomes the instrument of our torment. We cling to memories, to relationships, to our possessions, even to our own ideas of who we are. Each time we tighten our grip, we reinforce the illusion that these things can offer lasting safety, lasting happiness. But the rope, like all things in this world, is impermanent. The hands holding on will eventually tire, the rope will fray, and the fall, when it comes, will be all the more devastating because we refuse to see the precariousness of our position. The suffering isn't in the chasm itself, or even in the rope. It is in the desperate, exhausting act of clinging. It is in the refusal to acknowledge that the rope, however strong it feels, is still a temporary lifeline in a place of ultimate flux. The wisdom, then, is not to find a stronger rope or a safer ledge, but to understand the nature of the chasm and the rope, and to learn to let go. This letting go, however, is not a passive surrender to doom. It is an active, courageous stepping out from the precipice of our own making. It is the beginning of true liberation, a freedom found not in what we hold onto, but in what we dare to release. But how does one begin to loosen fingers that have been clamped shut for so long, especially when letting go feels like losing everything? This is where our journey into the heart of suffering truly begins. By understanding the subtle, insidious way we amplify our own pain through our attachment, and how this grip prevents us from seeing the ever-present possibility of ease. And before we dive deeper into these teachings, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Wisdom like this is easy to miss in the noise of life, but if this video found you, it was meant to. Now let's keep going. The quiet ache in our chests, the familiar gnawing in our bellies, these are not random intrusions into a peaceful existence. They are the direct echoes of our attempts to hold onto the world's fleeting moments as if they were permanent fixtures. We build our lives on foundations we desperately wish were solid rock, but in reality, they are shifting sands. When the tide of change inevitably rolls in, we panic, scrambling to shore up what is already dissolving. This frantic effort to preserve the unpreservable is the very mechanism that creates and perpetuates our suffering. Think of that man on the rope, his raw hands burning, his body trembling with the strain. He is not suffering because he is in a dangerous situation, but because he is clinging. The rope offers no comfort, only a constant reminder of his precariousness. Every tremor of the rope, every slight shift in his weight, sends jolts of terror through him. He is convinced that if he lets go, he will plummet. But what if he is already plummeting? What if the act of holding on is the fall itself, a slow, agonizing descent that blinds him to any other possibility? The Buddha's teaching on attachment is not a condemnation of love or appreciation. It is a profound insight into the nature of suffering that arises when we confuse appreciation with possession and love with control. When we attach, we begin to define our happiness by our ability to keep things exactly as they are. A beautiful sunset is lovely, but when we attach to it, we mourn its passing, feeling a sense of loss that diminishes the joy it initially brought. We love a person, but when attachment enters the picture, our love becomes tinged with fear, with the desperate need for them to remain constant to fulfill our ever-shifting expectations. This is where the trap is set. We believe that if we can just hold on tightly enough, we can secure our happiness. We believe that by controlling the circumstances, by preventing any deviation from our desired outcome, we will finally achieve peace. But this is an exhausting battle against reality. Every moment we spend trying to freeze time, trying to prevent change, is a moment we are not truly living. We are living in a self-created prison of anxiety, forever vigilant against the inevitable. The more desperately we cling, the more vulnerable we become. The more we try to hold our loved ones close, the more we risk suffocating them and ourselves with our anxieties. The more we grip our possessions, the more we live in fear of losing them. It's like trying to cup water in your hands. The tighter you close your fist, the more it slips through your fingers. The teaching isn't that we should stop caring or stop loving. It's that we must embrace the truth that the objects of our care and love are themselves subject to change, to loss, to decay. This is the fundamental insight. The more you try to hold something still, the more you feel the pain of its impermanence. The clinging itself becomes the source of suffering, a self-inflicted wound that festers because we refuse to acknowledge the natural flow of existence. Understanding this is the first step, a critical unveiling of the mechanism that binds us to pain. But if clinging is the problem, what is the alternative, and how do we even begin to imagine a life where we don't grip so tightly? This leads us directly into exploring the subtle confusion between genuine connection and the possessiveness that masquerades as love. We often speak of love with such reverence, weaving it into the fabric of our highest aspirations. We believe that to love deeply means to hold on tightly, to make the object of our affection an inseparable part of ourselves. This is where the confusion truly begins, where the beautiful impulse to connect becomes tangled with the painful grip of possession. Attachment whispers insidious lies, convincing us that love requires ownership, that to truly care for someone means to exert control, to ensure they never stray, never change in ways that displease us. Look at the way we speak about our relationships. We say mine, as in my partner, my child, my friend. This possessive language, though often innocent in its utterance, reveals a deeper current of attachment. It implies that these beings, these precious connections, are somehow owned by us, that their destinies are intertwined with our ability to keep them tethered to our lives. When they inevitably assert their own independence, when they grow and change in ways we didn't anticipate, we feel a sense of betrayal, of hurt. We interpret their natural evolution as a rejection of us, when in truth, they are simply living their own unfolding lives. True love, as the Buddha understood it, is a vastly different energy. It is a spaciousness, an unconditional acceptance that allows the other to be fully themselves, even when that self is different from what we might prefer. It is wishing for their well-being, their happiness, their freedom, even if that means they are not constantly by our side, or that their life takes paths we cannot follow. Attachment, on the other hand, is a form of imprisonment. It binds both the one who is attached and the one who is the object of attachment. It creates a relationship based on fear, the fear of loss, the fear of abandonment, the fear of being alone. Consider the anxiety that simmers beneath the surface when we are attached. We constantly monitor, we worry, we analyze every word and gesture for signs of shifting affection. This vigilance is exhausting, and it breeds resentment, both in ourselves and, subtly, in those around us. We inadvertently communicate a lack of trust, a fundamental belief that they need to be managed, to be kept safe from straying. This is not love, it is fear masquerading as care. The Zen story of the man and the rope, again, offers a stark illustration. His clinging to the rope is not an act of love for his own life, it is an act of terror. He is not embracing life. He is repelling death. Similarly, our attachment to people and things is often a desperate clinging to a sense of security, a fear of the vast unknown that lies beyond our current experience. We convince ourselves that without this person, without this job, without this particular circumstance, we will cease to exist, or at least our happiness will. This is the core of the illusion. We believe that our attachment is the glue that holds our lives together, that it is the very essence of our deepest connections. But it is, in fact, the force that pulls us apart, that sours joy into anxiety, and that ultimately leads to the pain of inevitable separation. The challenge, then, is to discern between the radiating warmth of genuine love, which is generous and free, and the constrictive grip of attachment, which is fearful and demanding. To truly love is to offer freedom, not to demand it. And this leads us to a deeper examination, for if attachment is not love, then what is this insistent, driving force that leads us to clutch at life's fleeting pleasures, and why is it so deeply ingrained? There's a restless energy that buzzes beneath the surface of our awareness, a constant hum of wanting. It's not always a thunderous demand, but often a quiet whisper, a desire for the next moment to be a little better, a little different, a little more satisfying than the present one. This is craving, a relentless pursuit that propels us forward, away from the stillness of what is. It's the engine of discontent, the invisible hand that shapes much of our experience. The Buddha identified this yearning not just as a symptom of unhappiness, but as its very root, the fertile soil from which all suffering grows. We crave comfort when we feel discomfort. We crave excitement when we feel bored. We crave validation when we feel unseen. We crave a future where things are finally right, where the struggles of today are a distant memory. This craving isn't merely about wanting more, it's about wanting things to be different. It's the inherent dissatisfaction with the present reality, a subtle but persistent rejection of what is. And because reality is always in motion, always a mixture of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, this rejection becomes a continuous, exhausting battle. Remember the man clinging to the rope. His craving is for safety, for the solid ground he left behind. He is not living on the rope, he is suffering the absence of the ground. His entire being is focused on what is missing, on the state he wishes to return to, or the state he wishes to avoid. This craving for a different reality is precisely what keeps him suspended in agony. We see this played out in countless ways every day. We scroll through social media, craving the seemingly perfect lives of others, feeling a pang of inadequacy about our own. We eat food we don't need, craving a fleeting sense of pleasure or comfort. We chase after promotions, after material possessions, after romantic ideals, believing that if only we attain these things, our craving will be satisfied, our suffering will end. But this is a mirage. Once we achieve one desire, another takes its place, often more subtle, more insidious. The mind is like a bottomless pit. No amount of filling can ever make it feel full. The Buddha's teaching is not to deny our desires, for that is like trying to stop a river. It is to understand the nature of craving. It is to see that craving arises from a fundamental misunderstanding of happiness. We look for happiness outside ourselves, in external circumstances, in possessions, in the approval of others. But true, lasting contentment arises from within, from a deep acceptance of the present moment and a release from the constant need for things to be different. When we crave, we are essentially saying no to where we are right now. We are pushing against the flow of life. This resistance creates friction, and friction, as we know, generates heat, the heat of anxiety, the heat of frustration, the heat of anger. The more we crave, the more we create the conditions for our own suffering. It's a self-perpetuating cycle. We crave because we are unhappy, and we are unhappy because we crave. Understanding craving as the root of suffering is a powerful, albeit unsettling, revelation. It means that much of the pain we experience is not a result of external forces, but of our own internal striving. It means that the key to liberation lies not in changing the world around us, but in transforming our relationship with our own desires. But if craving is the engine of our suffering, and it propels us away from the present, then what does this imply about the things we desperately seek to hold on to, the very fabric of our perceived reality? It suggests that nothing we grasp will endure, a sobering truth that we often resist with all our might. The air hangs heavy with the unspoken fear of loss. It's a primal dread woven into the very fabric of our existence. We build our towers of security, our relationships, our careers, our identities, all with the underlying hope that they will stand firm against the relentless tide of time. We tell ourselves that if we can just build strong enough, love deeply enough, work hard enough, we can somehow create permanence in a world defined by its opposite. But deeply, quietly, we suspect the truth. Nothing we hold will last. This truth is not a pronouncement of doom, but a simple observation of how things are. The vibrant bloom fades. The solid oak eventually succumbs to the elements. The strongest empires crumble. Even the stars, in their unfathomable brilliance, are subject to cosmic shifts and eventual dissipation. To witness this is to understand impermanence, or anicca, the fundamental characteristic of all conditioned existence. It is the law that governs everything that arises, everything that continues, and everything that ceases. When we are young, this truth often feels distant, an abstract concept for philosophers and poets. But as the years accumulate, as we witness the changing seasons of our own lives and the lives of those around us, the birth of children, the aging of parents, the passing of friends, impermanence becomes an unavoidable companion. We feel it in the wrinkle that appears on our skin, in the ache that lingers in joints, in the poignant farewell to a chapter of our lives. Our struggle is not with impermanence itself, but with our resistance to it. We cling to memories as if they were solid objects, replaying them endlessly, trying to recapture a feeling that has already gone. We invest our hopes and dreams in outcomes that we believe will bring lasting happiness, only to find that once achieved, they eventually lose their luster, or worse, are taken away. This clinging, this refusal to accept that everything is transient, is the fertile ground for suffering. The man on the rope, again, is a stark embodiment of this struggle. He clings because he fears the fall, fears the end of his current state. He is desperately trying to make the rope a permanent solution, a secure anchor. But the rope, too, is impermanent. The effort of holding on is exhausting, and the very act of clinging prevents him from seeing the potential for other ways of being, for other possibilities beyond the precarious perch he has chosen. We too are often clinging to ropes in our own lives, trying to preserve what is already in the process of dissolving. We cling to youth, to health, to relationships, to our sense of self. We resist the natural ebb and flow, the birth and decay, the rising and falling that is the very rhythm of life. This resistance creates immense inner turmoil. We are constantly fighting a battle we cannot win, depleting our energy and our joy in the futile effort to freeze time. The wisdom of impermanence is not about becoming apathetic or detached from life. It is about engaging with life fully, but without the desperate need to control its outcomes or to arrest its natural course. It is about appreciating the beauty of a flower, not because we expect it to last forever, but precisely because we know its bloom is fleeting. It is about loving deeply, knowing that love's true essence lies in the giving, not in the keeping. Recognizing that nothing we hold will last frees us from the burden of trying to make it so. It allows us to experience joy without the shadow of fear, to love without the possessiveness of attachment. This profound understanding shifts our perspective, but it also demands a reckoning with how we try to navigate a world of constant flux. How do we respond when our instincts scream for control in the face of such inevitable change? This leads us to confront the illusion that we are masters of our circumstances, a deeply ingrained belief that often results in significant mental anguish. The constant striving, the relentless planning, the meticulous charting of our futures, these are the hallmarks of our ingrained desire for control. We believe that if we can just engineer our lives perfectly, if we can anticipate and mitigate every potential problem, we will finally be safe, finally be happy. This illusion of control is a seductive narrative, a comfortable story we tell ourselves to ward off the seemingly chaotic nature of existence. But the Buddha taught that this pursuit is not only futile, it is a form of violence to the mind, a continuous act of war against the natural unfolding of reality. Think of the countless hours spent worrying about what-ifs. We rehearse potential disasters, we strategize against unknown threats, we micromanage our environments and the people within them, all in an effort to maintain a semblance of order. This constant vigilance, this mental grip, prevents us from seeing things as they truly are. It creates a distorted lens through which we perceive the world, a lens colored by our fears and our desires for a specific outcome. We are not observing reality, we are attempting to bend it to our will. The man clinging to the rope is a prisoner of his illusion of control. He believes that by holding on, he is mastering his situation. He is controlling his descent, or at least preventing an immediate plunge. But his control is limited, exhausting, and ultimately illusory. He cannot control the strength of the rope, the hand that lowers it, or the eventual need for it to be released. His mental energy is consumed by this false sense of mastery, leaving him blind to the fact that his very clinging is creating his suffering. When we insist on controlling every aspect of our lives, we set ourselves up for inevitable disappointment and pain. Life is inherently unpredictable. Unexpected challenges arise, circumstances shift, and the carefully constructed plans we've laid can crumble in an instant. When this happens, and it will happen, our illusion of control shatters, leaving us feeling devastated, betrayed, and powerless. We blame ourselves, we blame others, we blame the universe, but rarely do we see that the suffering came from the initial insistence on absolute control. This insistence on control is a violence to the mind because it creates a constant state of tension. The mind is never at rest. It is always striving, always anticipating, always trying to manage. This mental hypervigilance is deeply exhausting. It prevents us from experiencing the simple peace of allowing things to be. It's like trying to hold a wild bird in your fist. You can try to squeeze it tight, but the effort will likely break its wings, and you still won't be able to keep it permanently. True freedom for the bird is in its ability to fly. Furthermore, the illusion of control often translates into a need to control others. We subtly, or not so subtly, try to shape the behavior and choices of those around us to align with our own desires. This is a violation of their autonomy and a source of conflict in relationships. It stems from the fear that if others act independently, it will somehow threaten our own security or happiness. The path to peace lies not in strengthening our grip, but in softening it. It lies in recognizing the inherent limitations of our power to control external events and in shifting our focus to what we can influence, our own responses, our own attitudes, our own inner state. It is about cultivating a trust in the unfolding of life, even when it doesn't conform to our precise expectations. But if control is an illusion and letting go seems impossible, where does this leave us? It leaves us at the threshold of understanding that the deepest security is not found in what we hold, but in what the ego, the very seat of our perceived self, chooses to release. The I that we carry, the collection of memories, beliefs, preferences, and perceived strengths and weaknesses, is a powerful construction. It is the narrative we tell ourselves about who we are, and it is often fiercely protective of its own existence and its own version of reality. This ego, this sense of a separate, independent self, is the arch-nemesis of peace, for it thrives on holding on. It clutches at experiences, at identities, at opinions, all in an effort to fortify its own boundaries and maintain its sense of solidity in a world of flux. When we speak of letting go, the ego immediately bristles. It interprets release as annihilation, as the dissolution of its very being. It screams, "If I let go of this, who am I? What will be left?" This fear is understandable from the ego's perspective, for its entire existence is predicated on accumulation and adherence. It sees the world as a battleground, where possessions, achievements, and a solid identity are the victories that ensure its survival and dominance. The man clinging to the rope exhibits this egoic defense mechanism. His ego tells him that letting go of the rope means disappearing, ceasing to be. The pain of holding on is, in its distorted logic, preferable to the perceived oblivion of release. The ego would rather suffer intensely in a known, albeit agonizing, state than embrace the unknown freedom of surrendering its grip. It generates elaborate justifications for why it must hold on, why this particular rope is essential for its survival, even as the evidence of its suffering mounts. Our own egos do the same. They hold on to grudges because releasing them would mean admitting fault or letting go of a sense of righteous indignation. They cling to past hurts, replaying them endlessly, as if by keeping them alive, they can somehow gain power over them or garner sympathy. They cling to opinions and beliefs, even when presented with contradictory evidence, because to change them would be to admit fallibility, to acknowledge that the ego's carefully constructed worldview might be flawed. The ego's holding on isn't just about possessions or abstract ideas. It's about maintaining a consistent self-image. It's about ensuring that the story of me remains coherent and ideally impressive. If we experience failure, the ego tries to hide it or downplay it. If we have a moment of weakness, it tries to pretend it never happened. It's a perpetual performance, an exhausting effort to maintain a facade of strength and control. The deeper wisdom, however, is that true liberation comes not from egoic strengthening, but from egoic release. It is not about fighting the ego, for that is like fighting a shadow. It is about understanding its nature, recognizing its fearful projections, and gradually withdrawing the fuel it needs to sustain itself. The soul, the deeper, truer essence of our being, does not need to grasp. It exists in a state of natural flow, of inherent worthiness, of spacious connection. It doesn't identify with possessions or achievements. It is. When the ego loosens its grip, it's not an act of self-destruction, but of self-discovery. It is like a clenched fist opening to reveal the palm, not empty, but open to receive and to give. The space that is created when the ego releases its demands is not a void of nothingness, but a vast expanse of potential, of peace, of unconditional being. It is in this letting go that we begin to taste the profound freedom that lies beyond the confines of our perceived self. But if peace is synonymous with release, and the ego resists release so fiercely, then what about our innate human desire for safety, a desire so powerful it fuels so much of our clinging? There's a deep-seated yearning within us for security, a primal need to feel safe and protected from the storms of life. We equate security with stability, with predictability, with a solid ground beneath our feet that will never shift. We chase after it relentlessly through secure jobs, stable relationships, financial planning, and carefully constructed routines. We believe that once we achieve this state of impregnable safety, we will finally be free from fear and from suffering. But the Buddha's wisdom offers a radical inversion of this deeply held belief. Security, as we often define it, is the absolute opposite of peace. Consider the man clinging to the rope over the chasm. His entire aim is security. He sees the rope as his lifeline, his guarantee against a terrifying fall. He believes that as long as he holds on tight, he is secure. Yet, as we've seen, he is in a state of profound agony, fear, and exhaustion. His supposed security is the very source of his suffering. The tenseness in his muscles, the frantic beating of his heart, the constant worry that the rope might break or his grip might fail, these are not the hallmarks of peace. They are the hallmarks of anxiety, born from a misunderstanding of what true safety entails. Our modern pursuit of security often mirrors this man's predicament. We build elaborate defenses around our lives, trying to insulate ourselves from any possibility of discomfort, loss, or failure. We become so focused on maintaining this protective shell that we lose touch with the vibrant, dynamic reality of life. We become so risk-averse that we stifle our own growth, our own joy, our own opportunities for genuine connection. The very things we do to feel secure, hoarding resources, avoiding vulnerability, clinging to established routines, can paradoxically make us more fragile and more fearful when the inevitable disruptions occur. True peace, the Buddha taught, is not found in the absence of risk or change, but in our capacity to meet life with equanimity, regardless of the circumstances. It is not about creating an impermeable shield, but about developing an inner resilience that allows us to bend without breaking, to adapt without losing our center. Peace arises when we are no longer fighting against the natural currents of existence, but flowing with them. When we are desperate for security, we become rigid. We resist anything that threatens our carefully constructed order. This rigidity makes us brittle. A small tremor can shatter our carefully built defenses, leaving us feeling utterly undone. This is why people who seem to have everything, financial wealth, stable relationships, high status, can still be racked with anxiety and unhappiness. Their external security does not translate into inner peace because their pursuit of security has been a form of intense grasping. The paradox is that the more we chase after a feeling of absolute security, the more elusive it becomes. It's like trying to catch smoke. The harder you try, the more it dissipates. Peace, on the other hand, is not something to be acquired or guarded. It is something to be cultivated, to be allowed to arise from within. It is found in the present moment, not in the imagined safety of the future. This understanding may seem counterintuitive, even frightening, because our instincts are so strongly geared towards seeking security. But recognizing this inversion is crucial. It means that the path to peace involves not fortifying our defenses, but dismantling them, not clinging tighter, but learning to loosen our hold. It means understanding that true safety is not an external condition, but an internal state of acceptance and presence. But if security is the opposite of peace, and our internal state is so crucial, then what is the nature of the internal landscape we are trying to manage, and how much control do we really have over it? We inhabit a world of constant internal dialogue, a seemingly endless stream of thoughts, images, and sensations that tumble through our minds. It is so pervasive, so constant, that we often come to identify ourselves with this flow. I am my thoughts, we implicitly believe. This fear I am feeling, this judgment I am making, this memory I am replaying, these are me. This identification is so profound that when a difficult thought arises, we experience it as a personal attack, and when a pleasant one appears, we feel a surge of personal validation. But the Buddha offered a radical insight: even your thoughts are not yours. This statement is not intended to be a denial of our mental experience, but an invitation to see it with greater clarity. When we observe the mind with mindful attention, we begin to notice a striking pattern. Thoughts arise spontaneously, often unbidden. They appear, linger for a moment, and then dissolve, replaced by another, and then another. We don't consciously choose most of them. They are like clouds drifting across the sky, appearing from nowhere and vanishing just as mysteriously. We can influence them, we can encourage certain types of thoughts, but we cannot command them into existence or banish them at will. The suffering arises from our identification with these thoughts. When a thought of worry arises, and we believe, "I am worried," we become the worry. The thought then has power over us because we have granted it ownership of our entire being. We engage in a battle with the thought, trying to push it away, which only gives it more energy. We believe we are the author of our mental narratives, but in reality, we are more like the audience, watching a play unfold on the screen of our consciousness. Consider the man clinging to the rope. His thoughts are a torrent of fear, urgency, and desperation. He identifies completely with these thoughts, believing they are the absolute truth of his situation and his only guide. "I will fall," the thought screams. "I must hold on," it insists. These thoughts bombard him, and because he believes they are him, he cannot detach from them. They drive his every action, and his actions, in turn, generate more fearful thoughts. He is trapped in a feedback loop, fueled by the illusion that he is his thoughts. The teaching that our thoughts are not ours is an invitation to disidentify. It is to become the observer, the silent witness of the mental chatter. When a thought of anger arises, instead of thinking, "I am angry," we can observe anger is present. This subtle shift in language creates a space, a separation between ourselves and the thought. It allows us to see the thought as an impermanent phenomenon, a passing mental event, rather than an intrinsic part of our identity. This practice of non-identification is where true freedom begins. It doesn't mean that difficult thoughts will cease to arise. They will continue to appear as they always have, but our relationship with them will transform. We will no longer be tossed about by every mental wave. We will learn to acknowledge their presence without being consumed by them. We will see them for what they are, transient, impersonal mental occurrences. When we recognize that our thoughts are not us, then the fear associated with them begins to lose its sting. The terrifying thought of inadequacy doesn't feel like a definitive pronouncement of our worthlessness anymore. The anxious thought about the future no longer paralyzes us. We learn to navigate the inner landscape with a newfound sense of spaciousness and clarity, understanding that we are not the turbulent currents, but the vast, unmoving ocean beneath. But if our thoughts are not ours, and we are not our thoughts, then what does it mean to detach from them, and how do we distinguish that from simply ignoring them or pretending they don't exist? The concept of non-attachment can often be misunderstood as a form of emotional detachment, of indifference, or even of apathy. It conjures images of someone coolly observing suffering without feeling empathy, or of abandoning responsibilities with a shrug. This is a misconception that can lead to profound confusion and resistance. Non-attachment, in the Buddhist sense, is not about feeling less, but about feeling differently. It is not about indifference, but about freedom from the painful grip of clinging. Imagine a river. It flows continuously, its waters moving, changing, reflecting the sky overhead. A person standing on the bank can appreciate the beauty of the river, can feel the spray on their face, can hear its calming murmur. They can interact with the river, perhaps dip their hands in, but they do not try to possess it, to dam it up, or to force it to flow in a different direction. They appreciate its presence and its movement without trying to control it. This is the essence of non-attachment. The suffering arises not from experiencing emotions, but from clinging to them. We cling to pleasant emotions, wanting them to last forever, creating anxiety when they inevitably fade. We cling to unpleasant emotions, identifying with them, believing they define us, and resisting their natural ebb and flow. Non-attachment is the practice of allowing emotions to arise and pass without becoming fused with them. It is about experiencing joy without clinging to it and experiencing sorrow without becoming imprisoned by it. The man clinging to the rope experiences intense emotions, fear, desperation, panic. His clinging is fueled by these emotions, and his emotions are amplified by his clinging. He is utterly bound to the rope through the emotional turmoil it generates. Non-attachment would involve acknowledging the fear without letting it dictate his actions. It would mean seeing the rope not as a savior, but as a temporary and precarious object, and understanding that his true safety lies not in the rope, but in a different approach, a different state of mind. Non-attachment is about recognizing the impermanent nature of all experiences, including our emotions, and therefore not trying to hold on to them or push them away. It is about cultivating equanimity, a balanced state of mind that remains steady amidst the ebb and flow of life's ups and downs. It is an active, engaged presence, not a passive withdrawal. It means being fully present with whatever arises, joy, sorrow, anger, peace, without letting it dictate our sense of self or our actions. This freedom from clinging allows for a deeper, more authentic form of love and compassion. When we are not driven by the fear of loss or the need for control, our love becomes more generous and our compassion more genuine. We can offer support and kindness without expecting anything in return, without the underlying agenda of securing our own happiness or alleviating our own discomfort. It is a giving that is not tied to an outcome, a connection that does not require possession. So, non-attachment is not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of our relationship with our feelings and experiences. It is the ability to engage with life wholeheartedly, while simultaneously recognizing its transient nature and freeing ourselves from the chains of possessiveness. But if non-attachment is about freedom from clinging, then what about the ways we avoid difficult experiences altogether, and in doing so, inadvertently create more suffering? The mind, in its earnest desire to avoid discomfort, often resorts to clever evasions. We develop elaborate strategies to steer clear of anything that might trigger pain, anxiety, or unpleasantness. This can manifest in many ways. Procrastination, distraction, denial, or the constant pursuit of superficial pleasures that keep us from confronting deeper issues. This avoidance, however, is not a release from suffering. It is merely a different, often more insidious, form of attachment. Think of it this way: if clinging is grasping something tightly, avoidance is pushing something away with equal force. Both are reactions driven by a desire to control our experience and prevent discomfort. The one who clutches the rope over the chasm is attached to its supposed security. The one who jumps off the rope without considering the consequences, or who simply turns their back and pretends the chasm doesn't exist, is also attached to the idea of not falling, attached to the illusion that the problem can be ignored. Our avoidance of difficult emotions is a prime example. When we feel sadness, instead of allowing ourselves to feel it, to process it, we might immediately reach for a distraction, a busy work project, a binge-watching session, or a flurry of social engagements. We are not attached to sadness itself, but we are attached to the absence of sadness. We are attached to a state free from emotional pain. This attachment to a particular emotional state, even if it's a state of not feeling bad, is still a form of clinging, a resistance to the natural flow of emotional experience. The man clinging to the rope could be said to be avoiding the possibility of letting go, of trusting himself to find another way, or even of facing whatever lies below. He is attached to the immediate, albeit agonizing, certainty of the rope. His avoidance is not of the rope itself, but of the unknown that lies beyond it, or the perceived failure that letting go might represent. This avoidance creates a subtle but persistent mental burden. The issues we try to bypass don't disappear. They linger in the background, often growing larger and more formidable. The unprocessed emotions can manifest as physical ailments, chronic stress, or a general sense of unease. We might feel a nagging dissatisfaction that we can't quite pinpoint, or a vague anxiety that pervades our lives, all stemming from the things we've actively tried to not face. Furthermore, avoidance limits our capacity for growth. True personal development and wisdom often arise from confronting difficult truths and navigating challenging circumstances. When we consistently avoid these experiences, we stunt our own evolution. We remain stuck in a cycle of superficiality, never truly touching the depth and richness of life that arises from facing our shadows. The teaching here is quite profound. To truly transcend suffering, we must address the things we are most inclined to avoid. It requires courage to turn towards what we habitually flee from. It means acknowledging the presence of difficult emotions, confronting challenging situations, and accepting the reality of our impermanence rather than trying to outrun it. This process of facing what we avoid is not about dwelling in pain, but about understanding its nature and, in doing so, diminishing its power over us. And as we begin to face what we've avoided, we discover that the true liberator is not an external action, but a profound internal shift. The journey toward peace, toward freedom from the relentless grip of suffering, is often misunderstood as a quest for external solutions or dramatic gestures. We imagine enlightenment arriving like a lightning bolt or liberation being achieved through a grand act of renunciation. But the deepest, most transformative work happens not in the external world, nor in grand pronouncements, but in the quiet, internal realm of our own minds and hearts. Letting go, the Buddha taught, is fundamentally an internal act. This means that no amount of wanting to let go, no amount of wishing things were different, will bring about true release. The man clinging to the rope, desperate to stop the pain, still needs to internally decide to release his grip. The external action of loosening his fingers is a consequence of an internal shift in understanding and willingness. Until that internal change occurs, the grip remains, the suffering continues. We often fall into the trap of believing that if we can just change our circumstances, we will be free. If only we had a different job, a different partner, a different home, then we could finally let go of our anxieties and our frustrations. But the moment we achieve those external changes, we often find that the old patterns of clinging and avoidance simply reassert themselves in the new context. The suffering is not in the external situation, it is in our internal relationship to it. True letting go involves a change of perspective, a softening of our tightly held expectations, and a willingness to accept reality as it is, without resistance. It is about recognizing that the power to liberate ourselves lies not in altering the external world to suit our desires, but in transforming our internal response to the world as it is. This internal act requires conscious effort, consistent practice, and a deep commitment to observing our own minds with honesty and patience. It's like a gardener wanting to clear a patch of land. They can try to fight the weeds, to pull them out violently, or they can understand the nature of the soil, the conditions that allow the weeds to grow, and work with those conditions to cultivate something beautiful. Letting go is this kind of cultivation. It's not about forcing something to disappear, but about nurturing a different way of being within ourselves, a way that is more open, more accepting, and less bound by the need to control. This internal act can be challenging because it requires us to confront the deeply ingrained habits of our minds. We are used to fighting, to resisting, to clinging. Learning to let go is like learning a new language, a language of acceptance and spaciousness. It requires practice. Like any new skill, we might try to let go and find ourselves grasping again moments later. This is not a failure, it is simply part of the process. Each attempt, each moment of conscious release, however brief, is an internal act of liberation. The more we practice this internal letting go, the more we build the capacity for it. It becomes less of a monumental effort and more of a natural inclination. We begin to see that holding on is, in fact, the true burden, and releasing our grip, the ultimate freedom. But this process of internal change leads us inevitably to face what we often perceive as the most painful aspect of existence: loss, and how we can possibly navigate that without breaking. The sting of loss is a universal human experience, a sharp reminder of the impermanent nature of all things. We grieve the departure of loved ones, the passing of cherished phases in our lives, the forfeiture of opportunities, and the fading of physical abilities. Our instinct is to see loss as a punishment, a sign that something has gone terribly wrong, a cosmic injustice that leaves us wounded and diminished. But the Buddha offered a radically different perspective. Loss is not punishment. It is simply the natural unfolding of impermanence. When we grasp at things, at people, at experiences, we do so with the implicit, often unconscious, belief that they are permanent additions to our lives, that they will always be there. Then, when they inevitably depart, we feel a profound sense of violation, as if the universe has conspired against us. We ask, why me? What did I do to deserve this? This framing of loss as punishment is a significant source of our suffering, for it adds layers of blame, resentment, and despair to the existing pain of separation. Consider the man clinging to the rope. If the rope were to break, his immediate thought would likely be, "This is the worst thing that could possibly happen." He's already suffering intensely, but the idea of definitive loss of the rope seems like an even greater catastrophe. He's attached to its precarious hold, and if that hold is snatched away, he perceives it as a deliberate blow. The wisdom of seeing loss as a natural unfolding rather than punishment shifts our entire relationship with change. It helps us understand that everything that arises must also cease. This is not a cause for despair, but a fundamental truth of existence. When we accept this truth, we can begin to appreciate the time we do have with the people and things we cherish, without the constant undercurrent of fear that we will inevitably lose them. It allows us to love more fully, to engage more deeply, precisely because we are not trying to freeze time or create an artificial permanence. This shift in perspective doesn't erase the pain of grief, nor should it. Grief is a natural and necessary part of the human experience, a testament to the depth of our connections. However, by reframing loss, we can navigate grief with greater wisdom and less self-inflicted torment. Instead of drowning in the "why did this happen to me" narrative, we can begin to ask, how can I honor this experience? How can I integrate this loss and grow from it? When we see loss not as punishment, but as a natural expression of impermanence, we also become less inclined to avoid it. We become more willing to form deep connections, knowing that separation is a possibility, but not the end of everything. We learn to cherish the present moment with loved ones, understanding that each interaction is a gift, not a guarantee for the future. This acceptance allows for a richer, more courageous engagement with life. The suffering associated with loss often stems not from the loss itself, but from our resistance to it, from our belief that it is an injustice. By understanding loss as a natural part of the cycle of existence, we can begin to dismantle this resistance, allowing ourselves to experience the pain more directly and therefore to heal more completely. This is a profound reorientation of our understanding of life's inevitable transitions, but it also highlights how easily our joy can be overshadowed by anticipation of its end. Joy is a precious commodity, a fleeting sweetness that we crave and cherish. We chase after moments of happiness, savoring them, replaying them in our memories, and cherishing them as anchors in the sometimes turbulent sea of life. But there's a subtle danger lurking in our relationship with joy, an insidious shadow that can turn our brightest moments into sources of future pain. This is the danger of grasping at joy, of holding onto it so tightly that we transform its inherent lightness into the heavy burden of fear. When we experience a moment of profound happiness, a deep connection with a loved one, a creative breakthrough, a breathtaking experience in nature, our instinct is to hold onto it. We want it to last, to become a permanent feature of our lives. We begin to rehearse what it would be like to have that joy consistently, to replicate the conditions that brought it about. We mentally re-experience the joy, not just to savor it, but to try and capture its essence, to anchor it firmly in our lives. But this very act of holding on, this desperate attempt to preserve the feeling, begins to erode its purity. The joy, once a free-flowing river, becomes a dammed-up reservoir. The anticipation of its potential loss begins to taint its present sweetness. We start to worry, what if this ends? What if this moment passes? What if I lose this feeling? This worry, this fear of losing what brings us happiness, subtly transforms the joy itself. The man clinging to the rope is experiencing this twisted dynamic. He is clinging out of fear of falling, but if, for a fleeting moment, the rope steadied and he felt a surge of relief, a brief sense of security, he would likely clamp down even harder, terrified that any relaxation would bring about the dreaded outcome. His brief respite from terror would be immediately overshadowed by the fear of losing that respite. His clinging turns the potential for relief into a source of further anxiety. This is the tragedy of grasping. We take something beautiful and pure, and by trying to possess it, by trying to make it last forever, we imbue it with the potential for future pain. The very thing that brought us happiness becomes a source of anxiety, a constant worry that it will be taken away. We live in a state of anxious anticipation, where the memory of past joy is overshadowed by the fear of its absence. This transforms the present moment, where true happiness resides, into a battlefield between pleasure and its perceived, inevitable demise. The Buddha's teaching, therefore, is not to stop experiencing joy, but to experience it without attachment. It is to allow joy to arise and to be present with it fully, appreciating its beauty and its transient nature, without trying to hold on to it or control its duration. It is to recognize that the sweetness of a moment comes from its very impermanence, from its being a gift that can be appreciated but not possessed. When we can experience joy without the fear of its passing, we liberate ourselves from a significant source of suffering. We can love deeply without the dread of separation, appreciate beauty without the anxiety of its decay, and live fully in the present moment, free from the torment of trying to preserve what is inherently fluid. But this liberation requires a profound shift in our willingness to accept reality as it is, a willingness that often finds its ultimate test in embracing the totality of our experience. The human mind has a remarkable capacity for resistance. We build walls around ourselves, not of brick and mortar, but of expectations, judgments, and ingrained beliefs. We resist unpleasant truths, uncomfortable emotions, and anything that challenges our carefully constructed worldview. This constant pushback against reality, this internal battle against the way things are, is the very engine of much of our suffering. The path to profound rest, to deep and lasting peace, lies in a radical embrace of what is, a practice known as radical acceptance. Radical acceptance is not about liking what happens. It is not about condoning harmful actions or resigning oneself to a life of misery. Instead, it is a profound, unresisting acknowledgement of reality. It is the simple, yet incredibly difficult recognition that things are as they are in this moment. It is seeing the present moment clearly, without the filters of judgment, blame, or the desperate desire for it to be otherwise. Think about the man clinging to the rope. Radical acceptance would involve him looking at the chasm, at the rope, at his own strained body, and simply acknowledging, "This is my situation right now." It wouldn't mean he likes it, or that he wouldn't try to find a better way if possible. But it would mean he stops fighting the fact that he is, in this moment, clinging to a rope over an abyss. This acceptance would immediately reduce the immense mental energy he is expending by resisting the reality of his predicament. When we practice radical acceptance, we begin to untangle ourselves from the suffering that arises from our resistance. We stop wasting energy fighting what we cannot change. Instead, we conserve that energy, freeing ourselves to respond to the situation with clarity and wisdom. This does not imply passivity. In fact, radical acceptance often empowers us to take more effective action because we are no longer blinded by our own projections and desires. We can see the situation more clearly and therefore make more appropriate choices. Acceptance is not about liking the pain, but about acknowledging its presence without adding to it. When we are in pain and we resist it, we create secondary suffering, the suffering of frustration, of anger at ourselves for feeling pain, of despair that the pain will never end. Radical acceptance allows us to experience the primary pain without the added layers of negative self-judgment and resistance. It's like a wound. The initial injury is painful, but if we keep poking at it, trying to deny it, or getting angry at ourselves for having it, we only make the healing process more difficult. This practice is particularly challenging when we face loss, betrayal, or profound disappointment. Our natural instinct is to rail against the unfairness of it all, to demand that it not be so. But radical acceptance offers a way to acknowledge the harshness of reality, to feel the hurt without condemning ourselves or the situation. It is a path towards inner stillness, a place where peace can finally begin to take root, not because our circumstances have changed, but because our internal relationship to them has transformed. But realizing that peace comes from accepting what is leads to the potent question, in this present moment, what truly is required of us? As we delve deeper into the heart of Buddhist wisdom, a profound paradox begins to emerge. We spend so much of our lives striving, planning, and accumulating, all in an effort to secure a future that feels more complete, more satisfying. Yet, the ultimate destination of this relentless pursuit, true peace and contentment, is found not in the accumulation or the striving, but in the utter simplicity and emptiness of the present moment. The present moment requires nothing from us. Think about the relentless cycle of desire and fulfillment that defines so much of our experience. We believe happiness lies in obtaining something. A new possession, a promotion, a relationship, a certain feeling. We pour our energy into acquiring these things, believing that once we have them, we will finally be content. But the satisfaction is often fleeting, quickly replaced by a new desire, a new lack that compels us to continue the cycle. The present moment, in its unadorned reality, is not lacking anything. It simply is. It is a space of pure potential, of unconditioned awareness. When we are fully present, truly inhabiting this moment, we discover that there is no deficit, no fundamental need that must be met. The worry about the future, the regret about the past, the anxieties about what needs to be done, these dissolve when we are anchored in the here and now. Consider the man clinging to the rope. If he were to truly enter the present moment, not as a place of fear, but as a space of pure sensation and awareness, he might notice the feel of the rope in his hands, the temperature of the air, the sounds of the environment. In that pure awareness, devoid of his fearful interpretation, the immediate need to cling might begin to loosen. The present moment itself, in its raw existence, doesn't demand that he hold on for dear life. It simply offers itself to be experienced. This realization can be startling because it runs counter to our ingrained belief that we must always be doing something to achieve happiness or security. We are conditioned to believe that contentment is earned, that peace is a reward for effort. But the Buddha taught that peace is the natural state of affairs when we cease to impose our desires and our resistances upon reality. The present moment, when truly met, is inherently complete. It doesn't need us to fix it, to improve it, or to make it something it's not. When we learn to rest in the present moment, we discover a profound sense of freedom. We are not bound by the imagined pressures of the future or the burdens of the past. We are simply here, available to experience life as it unfolds, without the insistent demands of our own minds telling us what needs to be different. This requires a practice of mindfulness, of bringing our attention back to the here and now, again and again, whenever we find ourselves drifting into the realms of craving and resistance. The present moment doesn't ask us to be anything other than what we are in this exact instant. It doesn't require us to have achieved anything, to have solved any problems, or to be free of all discomfort. It simply invites us to be present with whatever is arising, without judgment. This simple act of presence, of resting in what is, can be the most liberating practice of all. But in this spaciousness of the present, where all our striving seems to dissolve, there remains one final, tenacious construct that we cling to, something that fuels so much of our effort and our struggle. The journey through the teachings on suffering, attachment, craving, impermanence, and acceptance brings us to the very bedrock of our perceived self, our identity. We have constructed an elaborate sense of who we are, a narrative woven from our experiences, our beliefs, our relationships, and our opinions. This identity, this sense of being a distinct and separate individual, is the final, and perhaps most subtle, attachment we hold. It is this deeply ingrained sense of I that fuels much of our clinging, our craving, and our resistance to the flow of life. We identify with our accomplishments, our failures, our possessions, our social roles, even our suffering. I am a successful professional, I am a victim, I am an anxious person, These labels become so intertwined with our sense of self that challenging them feels like threatening our very existence. The ego, the architect of this identity, works tirelessly to maintain its solidity, to ensure that the narrative of the separate self remains coherent and intact. It fears that if this identity dissolves, there will be nothing left, only a void. Consider the man clinging to the rope. His identity in that moment is that of a survivor, a capable individual navigating a crisis. He is attached to this image, and it drives his desperate actions. If he were to completely let go of the rope, the narrative of the one hanging on would cease. His identity would need to transform, perhaps into something that can adapt, that can flow, that can find a path beyond the immediate crisis. This transformation, for the ego, is terrifying. The Buddha's teachings on non-self, or anatta, directly challenge this notion of a fixed, independent identity. They reveal that what we perceive as a solid, enduring self is, in fact, a constantly changing interplay of physical and mental processes. There is no permanent, unchanging I at the core of our being. This realization is not an invitation to nihilism, but to profound liberation. When we understand that our identity is not a fixed entity, but a fluid process, the fear of its dissolution begins to wane. Accepting the impermanence of our identity allows us to release the desperate need to defend it, to prove it, or to enhance it. We stop investing so much energy in curating an image of who we think we should be, and instead begin to rest in the natural, unconditioned state of being. This is not about becoming no one, but about realizing that the someone we thought we were is a construct, a story that can be gently released. When the attachment to identity loosens, so too does our attachment to outcomes, to possessions, and to the need for control. We become less invested in maintaining a certain image or fulfilling a particular role, and more available to experience life authentically as it is. The fear of loss diminishes because if I am not a fixed entity to be lost, then what is there truly to lose? This is the final frontier of letting go, the ultimate release from suffering. It is the realization that the self we have so fiercely protected is not the essence of our being. The journey is not towards finding a more solid or better identity, but towards recognizing that true freedom lies in the spaciousness that arises when the need for a fixed self finally dissolves. It is the ultimate surrender, not to oblivion, but to the boundless reality of existence itself. Make sure to subscribe for more Buddhist wisdom and hit that notification bell so you never miss the next teaching. Until then, stay present, stay peaceful, and we'll see you in the next one.